Good morning, John Muchler here, just outside my secret bunker and hidden hideaway and headquarters for the Ferndale Alliance Church. And people of faith are asking this question quite regularly now: when is enough enough and we can start going back to church? At what point do we say, forget about what my government says, we're going to go back to church? I'm going to attempt to answer that question this morning. And by using our passage that we've been studying this week, we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount, and we are at the last of what's called the Beatitudes, the list of blessings spoken by Jesus in his sermon. And so we're in chapter 5 of Matthew, verse 10, and we're going to try to answer that question today. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, by the way, so far in this passage, everything has been in third person. Blessed are the poor, those who mourn, those who are meek, those who hunger and thirst, those who show mercy, those that are pure in heart, those that are persecuted. But a shift is going to take place suddenly here in verse 11. A shift from third person to second person language that's using the word you. Again, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then verse 11, blessed are you. Something important is taking place here. Jesus wants us to think about ourselves, how this impacts our lives by being believers and followers and disciples of him. Blessed are you when people, and there are three things that happen here. Number one, they insult you or they revile you, if you look at the old King James lesson language. Second thing is they persecute you, and they thirdly falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. I'm, by the way, asked sometimes, was I ever persecuted when I was an elected official, when I was the mayor or a council member? No, I was never persecuted. I can't think of anything said or done to me that would rise to the level of calling it anything close to persecution. Were bad things said about me? Were false things said about me because I was a person of faith? Yes, it happened on rare occasion. Sometimes it was online. Sometimes it was face-to-face in person. Sometimes it was in a public meeting. Yeah, people would say unkind things that were clearly driven by my status as a person, a professional person of faith, but never persecution. And I don't think I ever complained about it because it was so seldom and so small. And it really just showed the small-mindedness and bigotry of a very, very, very small group of people out there. But again, listen to these three words, and then I want you to realize what is not here. Blessed are you when people insult you, when they persecute you, and they falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets before you. What is not there is the word inconvenience. He doesn't say, blessed are you when you are inconvenienced at times in your faith or because of your faith. And I would like to suggest that right now, this is what we are experiencing. We are experiencing a grand inconvenience because of this COVID-19 pandemic that is going on right now. It's a big deal. It is a big deal. The fact that we can't gather together personally in groups, that's a big deal. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. So when is it okay? Because I'm getting asked this question. When is it okay to finally say, government, we just can't wait any longer. We need to meet together. When is it okay to go against our government? And I want to answer that question this morning very carefully. The general principle, and we find it not just in Romans 13, and that's our key passage, but elsewhere, is that we listen to and obey governments as a rule, as a standard, as a default principle. We listen to our local and our national governments. We do what they say. We find that in Romans 13. Take a look at it on your own. We find it in Peter's writings, and we find it elsewhere. Even Jesus says, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar. But at what point do we say, forget about it, enough is enough? and there are indeed some biblical principles. Now, this Sunday, I happen to be preaching on some amazing women, and two of them are the midwives that we find in the book of Exodus chapter 1. Their names are Puah and Shiphrah. These midwives were amazing because they were given orders by Pharaoh to toss all the Hebrew baby boys into the Nile River because the Pharaoh was concerned about the thriving population of Hebrews. And so they didn't do what the Pharaoh wanted. The Pharaoh wanted these midwives to basically kill these baby boys. They wouldn't do it. They made up a story. They told Pharaoh, these Hebrew women, they are so vigorous and strong and hardy that they go into labor and they deliver instantly before we even have a chance to answer our cell phones and get there. They made up a story. And it says in the scriptures that they are commended for their faith, which was their disobedience to the law. Note here carefully, they were dealing with life and death issues, the life and death of these baby boys. I think there are some contemporary examples during the Holocaust, during the horrible Nazi regime and persecution of Jewish people and others, that people of faith, and not just people of faith, your Oscar Schindlers out there who broke the law, who were deceptive, who were dishonest, who were not following the government in order to find ways to rescue the Jewish people. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a controversial example, but I think one to take note, and a brilliant German theologian during the Nazi regime, was involved with a plot to assassinate Hitler, and one can only wonder the difference that might have made had it succeeded. It didn't. He was caught, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer was executed. And generally today, a little controversial, but generally today, people admire his courage and his faith and his willingness to stand against an evil law. We're not dealing with an evil law right now. We are inconvenienced right now. Well, how about Peter? The story of Peter is oftentimes used in Acts chapter 5, a brand new church. He is ordered by the Supreme Court of his day not to preach the gospel. And he says, and he's put in jail, and they're in jail because they're preaching the gospel, but God gets them out of jail, and they go around preaching the gospel again, and he is once again arrested, and he's asked, why are you disobeying the law? And Peter says, you be the judge. Is it more important that I obey man's law, human laws, or God's law? And he goes right out. He's beaten, by the way. There are consequences to disobeying the civil laws. He is beaten. His followers are beaten. But they go right out again and preach the gospel. So we come back to the question. When is enough enough? And barring the government permitting it, when can believers get back together and gather for worship? I like to say this. I think those who do not participate in church communities, and that can be the Jewish synagogue, it could be places of worship, temples, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, really any religious group that likes to gather together, is I think people who do not do that, I'm going to suggest you may underestimate the power and what is essential in terms of faith to physically gathering together. In our Christian perspective, in our world, there are a number of verses that tell us that we must gather together. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 25 says this, do not forsake the assembling of one another. And there are people that put their lives, their homes, their property, their families at risk for this privilege, this responsibility, this right, let me say it this way, this need to gather together in a geographic locations. This is why there are private house churches all around the world that meet secretly because their governments will not allow them to meet. Places like China and Iran and other places that people want to meet. They would love to meet, but the risk is just too high. The risk is that their property, their livelihoods, their businesses, even their lives are being put at risk. In other words, for people of faith, gathering together is also, and here's the word we use today, essential. It is an essential activity, and we shouldn't underestimate that at all. There are words that are part of our community of faith. And again, that's irrespective of the label that's on our churches or our synagogues or our temples. Words like community, fellowship, communion, celebrate, assembly, worship, gathering, church, synagogue, temple. All those words mean the bringing together of God's people into fellowship and to proximity. We also have the mention of our Constitution, our First Amendment rights, and I'm going to take a moment to read them to you. And I'm just concerned that in our decisions, somebody's making a decision, someone in authority, as to what is essential. Going to the grocery store and buying food is, in the judgment of government, essential. And in those activities of going to the store, we find ourselves with large groups of people that are properly socially spaced. That's our good understanding of good practice, and we're socially distanced away from each other. But there are large groups of people that are gathered for the purpose of purchasing food. That is considered essential. I want to posit the argument that God's people gathering together for their own personal health and safety and well-being is also essential. And I want to suggest, to be fair and equitable, that people of faith should be allowed to gather together in the same way that people are allowed to gather in the grocery stores. Again, these beautiful words, these amazing words that are rare within nations and countries, but we have them. The First Amendment says this, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for the redress of grievances. I am petitioning the government right now, petitioning you to be equitable and to see the assembly of people of faith, of all faiths, that their need to assemble together is essential, and that they ought to be allowed, if not encouraged, to do that with all of the sound safety procedures, face coverings if necessary, social distancing, and more than anything else, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a constitutional authority, and I'm not a scientist, but I also recognize that I think that this quarantine of healthy people doesn't make sense to a lot of us. Yes, quarantining of people who are at high risk or who have been infected, of course, makes sense. So once again, we're not being persecuted. Nobody should say that, and that's just reckless. Are we being inconvenienced? Yes, we are right now, and we can certainly hang in there a little bit longer. Again, blessed are those that are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let's act like people of the kingdom of heaven with grace, patience, love, tolerance, and forbearance, and just hang in there a little bit longer. Thank you for watching today. Have a great day, and we'll see you this Sunday for church.